You know, American history is full of weird facts. But this one's a real head-scratcher. Have you ever heard of a president who served a full term, lost his re-election, and then just came back 4 years later to win the whole thing all over again? It's a political comeback story that's literally one of a kind, and it all belongs to one guy.
Yep, that's him, Grover Cleveland. He holds the absolutely unique distinction of being both the 22nd and the 24th President of the United States. He's the only one to ever serve 2 non-consecutive terms. And the story of how that happened? Well, it tells you everything you need to know about his character and the wild times he lived in.
So where did this guy even come from? Well, long before he ever set foot in the White House, Cleveland was building this rock-solid reputation. He started out as a local sheriff, then became the mayor of Buffalo, and then, bam, governor of New York. And at every single step, he got known as this tough, no-nonsense leader who absolutely despised corruption.
Now, to really get how incredible his rise was, you have to understand the political scene back then. Cleveland was a Democrat in an era that was just completely dominated by Republicans. So his victory in 1884, it sent this massive signal across the country. The American people were just fed up with political scandals and were desperate for a leader they could actually trust.
And look, this whole anti-corruption thing wasn't just some campaign slogan for him. It came from a deep, core philosophy that would define his entire career. It's a pretty simple idea, but back in the Gilded Age, it was almost revolutionary. This was it. This was his motto, his mantra, the lens through which he saw every single decision. For Cleveland, being in office wasn't about gaining power or getting rich. It was a sacred duty that he owed to the people. Simple, powerful, and he stuck to it no matter what it cost him politically.
So his core beliefs were really straightforward. Keep the government small, keep taxes low, be honest, balance the budget, and follow the Constitution. And he put his money where his mouth was, like, immediately. He famously refused to just hand out government jobs to his political buddies. Now you can imagine, this drove his own party leaders totally crazy, but it proved to the public that he was dead serious about cleaning up Washington.
Okay, so how did all these principles actually translate into action? Well, if you look at his accomplishments, you see a president who was actively trying to build a legacy of reform, one pretty bold move at a time. First up, he went right after the spoils system. You know, that old corrupt practice of giving government jobs to your political allies. Cleveland expanded the civil service, making sure that more and more jobs were filled by people who were actually qualified and had earned their spot, not just people who knew the right politician. Now this was a huge deal. The Interstate Commerce Act created the very first federal agency to regulate a private industry. See, at the time, railroads basically had a stranglehold on farmers, charging them insane prices. This act was the government finally stepping in and saying, nope, enough is enough. It established this idea that the government could be a referee in the economy, a concept that honestly underpins so much of our regulation today.
And get this, in his first term alone, Cleveland vetoed 414 bills. 414. That's more than all the presidents who came before him combined. He basically used his veto pen like a weapon against what he saw as wasteful spending and phony pension claims for veterans. It just cemented his image as the nation's watchdog.
Then, during his second term, he walks right into a massive economic crisis. His solution? He fiercely defended the gold standard, this policy that every single US dollar had to be backed by a real amount of gold sitting in a vault. He was convinced it was the only way to keep the currency stable and stop runaway inflation. It was a really controversial move, but it just showed how committed he was to his economic principles, for better or worse. But, and this is a big but, that absolute commitment to his principles came at a really steep price. It turns out his greatest strength, that unbending integrity, was also the source of his biggest political fights and worst crises. Just take the whole debate over tariffs. Cleveland argued that high taxes on imported goods just made things more expensive for regular people, so he fought like crazy to lower them. But Congress, which was backed by powerful businesses that liked the high tariffs, fought back just as hard. This one issue cost him a ton of support and was a huge reason he lost the election in 1888. And then, during his second term, disaster struck. The Panic of 1893 spiraled into one of the worst economic depressions the country had ever seen. Businesses failed, banks just vanished, unemployment went through the roof. And Cleveland's principled, hands-off approach? To millions of desperate Americans, it looked way too slow and way too little. This all leads to one of the most defining questions of his entire presidency.
When he was faced with this massive labor showdown, was he protecting the nation or was he crushing the working class?
So here's what happened. During the Pullman strike, railroad workers walked off the job to protest devastating wage cuts, and it paralyzed the nation's transportation. What was Cleveland's response? He sent in federal troops, saying he had a duty to protect the U.S. mail. The strike was broken, often violently, and Cleveland earned the lasting hatred of labor unions all across America.
So, where does that leave us? How are we supposed to weigh this incredibly complicated legacy? He was a reformer, a man of principle, no doubt, but he was also this inflexible leader whose actions had some really harsh consequences. This table really sums it up perfectly. You can see the two sides of the coin. On one side, you have his undeniable strengths, his absolute commitment to honesty, his push for economic responsibility, and the real progress he made in regulation. But on the other side, you've got the controversies, that slow response to the crisis, his anti-labor actions, and a political inflexibility that just pushed people away.
Ultimately, you have to realize Grover Cleveland was never trying to win a popularity contest. That wasn't the goal. He was laser-focused on what he believed was right, what was honorable, and what the Constitution demanded. And that's why he's remembered for his character, even by the people who fiercely disagreed with his policies.
And that leaves us with a final thought to chew on. In a leader, is that kind of unbending, rigid principle their greatest asset, the thing that guarantees integrity above all else? Or is it their biggest flaw, preventing the kind of compromise you need to actually govern effectively? That's the question right at the heart of Grover Cleveland's unique story.